Hello. It came to my attention recently that even some conservative and pro-Israel commentators are using the term the West Bank. And I thought this is a good opportunity to explain why calling Judea and Samaria, the hills around Jerusalem that the Jewish people came from, as the West Bank, a term so lacking in any historical use, is in fact anti-Jewish colonialism, and more broadly, it is being used to undermine a key Western ally and to infiltrate our academic institutions with cultural Marxists and jihadis who hate our civilization. Now let's take a step back for a minute. If you look at the Bible or Tanakh of Jewish scripture, even the Quran, there is no mention of a West Bank. But Judea and Samaria comes up time and time again. Judea, traditionally dominated by Jerusalem, is where the word Judaism and Jew come from. Imagine that. Yehuda was the son of Jacob, and the tribe of, guess the name, Judah, as the first of the 12 Jewish tribes to take its place in the land of Israel. And out of this area arose the kingdom of Judah, 3,000 years ago after the United Kingdom of Israel split. Samaria, in the northern part of the wrongly called West Bank, was a city from which another Jewish kingdom grew, near present-day Shechem, Nablus in Arabic, over the lands of the Jewish tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. For centuries afterwards, as enemies came and went, locals were called Judeans and Samaritans of various kinds, as it is mentioned in the Christian Bible too. The name Palestine was forced upon Israel as an insult by the Romans, and empires rose and fell over this land, from Romans to Greeks, Seleucids, the Muslim caliphates, and Ottoman Turks. There is not a single instance of Judea and Samaria being called the West Bank. So how did this name come about? Where does it come from? Throughout the 19th century, English speakers called it Judea. Arabs called it Samira, taking the Jewish name for the north, and often using it for all of the Judean hills, when not speaking about Israel as a whole. And Jews used both names, Samaria for the north and Judea for the south. And as late as the 20th century, the early 20th century, Arabs did not call this area the West Bank. They used the Hebrew name, albeit with Arabic phonetics, Samira. Neither did they use the word Palestine for themselves. They considered themselves Arabs above all. So what changed? Upon the departure of the British Army in May 1948, Jews were free to proclaim their independence after nearly 2,000 years. At this moment, 5 Arab armies attacked from Transjordan, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. In the chaos, and despite all odds, Israel managed to expand its territory and not be wiped out by this unprovoked attack. From 1949, the Kingdom of Jordan took over Judea and Samaria, annexing the land under its rule from 1950, and renamed it the West Bank, designating the rest of the land under its rule as the East Bank, present-day Jordan, of the Jordan River running through the then Kingdom of Jordan. The Arabs in Judea and Samaria did not at the time even welcome this name, nor the Kingdom of Jordan. They often refused to be part of a Jordanian state and committed terrorist attacks against both Israel and Jordan, again unprovoked. This lasted until 1967. Early in the year, the Soviet communist regime in Moscow falsely reported that Israel was amassing an army. Nasser, the dictator of Egypt, sent troops to the Sinai and repeatedly threatened to wipe out the Jewish state, pushing its people into the sea. With Egypt amassing 100,000 soldiers on its border, as well as Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon preparing their armies, Israel launched a surprise attack that destroyed the Egyptian Air Force. It was a miracle. Throughout the ensuing war, the Americans held back their support from Israel, not wanting to bring in the Soviet communists into a direct fight, since they were busy in Vietnam. What is important here for Judea and Samaria is that after Israel's victory and its expanded territory, the Soviet regime in Russia was astute enough to see that Western leftists and academics on American university campuses were switching sides from Israel in the late 1960s due to their universalist and anti-American ideas born out of post-war anti-nationalism and let to grow in university ivory towers away from real-life pressures, wherein emerging neo-Marxist identity politics were allowed to take hold and grow roots. The KGB sent agents into the Arab refugee camps in Judea and Samaria, and Syria and Jordan in the wake of this brief 1967 war. It was a political opportunity to strike at the West by using our own academic institutions against us, to plant opponents of our civilization within by creating a new nationalist identity in Judea and Samaria, and feeding it to naive leftists in America as a social justice cause, a new fad to join, something to feel good about yourself, whilst actually it was for the killing of Jews. This was only 3 years after the Palestinian flag had been created by a terrorist organization, fusing Jordanian anti-Semitism with Soviet propaganda and Nazi writings. This was the newly created PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. Under Soviet influence, it removed all references to Samira and adopted the term West Bank. In return for its aligning against the West, it received Soviet funding and even weapons. A new nationality was born at the height of America's countercultural revolution on its university campuses. And this was no coincidence. This was an intentional Soviet interference to tilt academia against its own society in the West. Later, in a 1984 interview by Yuri Bezmenov, a KGB agent who had defected to the United States, he said there were 4 stages of ideological subversion to destroy communism's enemies being used by the Soviet regime. 1. Demoralization. 2. Destabilization. 3. Crisis. And 4. Normalization. The first stage of KGB ideological subversion of demoralization involves the planting of new ideas to erode the current culture, so that the second stage of destabilization, in which various identity groups are pit against each other, can come into being. However, I digress. From this point, after the PLO was founded in 1964, and through the 1970s, use of the term the West Bank explodes in various studies departments, inverted commas, in California, aligned with the political left and sympathetic to communist doctrine. This is important to understand, not just for Israel and the Jewish people, but for the West. We have been attacked ideologically. The names Judea and Samaria are steeped in history, an ethnic identity, Judaism, and tied to century upon century of Jewish people in the very cradle of their culture, the hills around Jerusalem. This term, the West Bank, whilst geographically is accurate, has no other truth associated with it. Indeed, marrying lies to a truth is the point. Like most new words invented by the cultural left, a truth has been married to a lie in order to attack a core part of our heritage and Western traditions through our Israeli allies. Using the so-called West Bank, inverted commas, is colonization. And this is worrying because news broadcasters in the mainstream media have used this, thinking it, not Judea and Samaria, is the neutral term. Only Judea and Samaria has historical precedent, when in fact it is being used, the West Bank, to delegitimize Israel, to erase thousands of years of Jewish presence in the hills of Judea, and to rally useful idiots in the West around a terrorist banner in order to create the third stage of ideological subversion, crisis. In this stage, revolutionaries and marginalized identity groups are used to attack the dominant culture, to erode trust in society, and to normalize crisis so that a revolution can unfold to destroy us and to break our society apart. The anti-Jew hate mobs we have seen are a direct result of the since-gone Soviet regime aligning with Islamicist terrorists in the 1960s to build a new national identity in opposition to American and Western interests by using Jews as a scapegoat. They did this with no care for Jewish life. Indeed, the goal was to kill Jews to get to America, and then to have Jews one day be killed by Americans. And yes, it is true that the Soviet regime fell, but we must not allow perpetual crisis to be normalized by the radical left in order to bring about a revolution and the killing of innocent Jews in the name of role-playing social justice. I encourage you to use Judea and Samaria when referring to the cultural areas of the Judean hills. We must not let the work of Islamicist terrorists and cultural Marxists change words and their meanings to undermine all we hold dear and all we have built for our children. Thank you for watching, and do what you can to help the channel. This is The Zionist.